They said it was the devil, but they buried the truth beside the daughters they burned. Imagine a town so consumed by fear, it turned on its own blood. A place where daughters were not raised, but marked. A town where the scent of smoke didn't come from hearth fires, but from stakes lit at dawn, fueled by hysteria, envy, and something far darker than mere superstition. What if I told you that long before Salem, another witch hunt unfolded, quietly, efficiently, and erased from textbooks by those who profited most from its silence, a forgotten purge, one hidden under a blanket of religious duty, moral reform, and profit. This is the story of Asheville, Pennsylvania, a town that no longer exists on maps, because it was never meant to. In 1713, Asheville was founded by a splinter sect of Puritans who believed the Massachusetts Bay Colony had grown too soft, too forgiving. Led by the enigmatic preacher Elias Grinmore, they sought to build a new Eden, one ruled not by mercy, but by judgment. A theocracy forged in fire, silence, and absolute control. But what Grinmore feared most was not the devil outside the gates. It was the women within them. The daughters of Asheville were taught obedience from the cradle, seen, not heard. Their thoughts were monitored, their steps counted, and if one whispered, wept, or resisted, her fate was sealed, not all at once, not publicly. At first it was exile, then confinement, and finally, flames. Officially, the Asheville witch purge never happened. The colonial records, redacted. The original church ledgers, burned in a mysterious fire in 1782. But in the basement of a decommissioned Quaker church in central Pennsylvania, behind a false wall and sealed in a chest lined with black wax, I found something. A collection of letters written by a girl named Mercy Hale, one of the daughters. She was 17, intelligent, defiant, and marked for death. What she wrote, what she witnessed, is not just the tale of a single girl's resistance against tyrannical dogma. It's a window into a forgotten method of control, one that still echoes through the institutions we trust most. Mercy Hale was silenced, but tonight her words speak. Are you ready to descend? Because once you begin, you don't return. Mercy Hale's first letter was dated October 3rd, 1734. It was addressed not to a family member, but to God. Not the God of forgiveness, not the God of grace, but the God she was told demanded silence, obedience, and blood. She wrote, "If you are watching me, then you already know. I saw what they did to Eliza Greaves. They said she fell from the bluff, but her fingernails were torn. There was no fall. There was a trial, quiet, secret, unwritten. Her screams were never recorded, but they echo in my ears each night. Eliza was the first, at least the first that Mercy knew of, a girl only 15 caught sneaking out after dark to meet a boy from a neighboring settlement. She was labeled corrupted, her womb a vessel compromised, not by lust, but by Satan. No record of trial exists, no death certificate, no burial, just a hollow patch of earth behind the church where the grass still refuses to grow. The punishment for transgression in Asheville was not exile, it was erasure. But that was the method, and behind every method, there is a motive. Mercy's letters hint at something more sinister than simple religious zealotry. They speak of a hidden doctrine, passed down only to the elders, a doctrine that claimed women were not merely temptresses, they were gateways, vessels not just for life, but for unseen forces. One line chilled me to my marrow. They do not kill the witches for power, they kill them to keep it. Let that sink in. This wasn't about fear of evil. It was about managing energy, silencing dissent, keeping the collective will of the town in the hands of 9 men who called themselves the Shepherds. The more you study hidden history, the more this pattern repeats. They create fear to justify control. They isolate the deviants to reinforce conformity, and they erase the inconvenient to preserve the illusion of divine order. And who better to make disappear than the young, the feminine, the emotionally intelligent? Ashvale's daughters weren't burned for their sins. They were burned because they saw too much, because they asked the questions the elders feared most, and if this sounds familiar, it should, because every era has its Ashvale. You just haven't recognized the stakes yet. Mercy's second letter was never meant to be read. It was stitched into the hem of her linen shift, hidden with thorns and wax, meant to bleed anyone who dared open it. I bled, but what it revealed cut far deeper. The shepherds keep the black book in the altar, she wrote. Not the altar the congregation kneels before, but the one beneath it. There is a trapdoor under the pulpit, disguised by stone and scripture. I saw them descend, cloaked in wool, carrying the infant that vanished 2 nights prior. That infant, Sarah Milcroft, was the pastor's niece. They claimed wolves took her from her crib. But no wolves leave clawless corpses. No wolves wear robes. Mercy wrote of a ritual, not of witchcraft, but of extraction. They do not fear witches because they believe in Satan, she said. They fear us because they have learned to harvest what they call the sacred essence, a force they believe flows strongest in the young, the pure, the unbroken, and only through bloodletting can it be transferred into themselves. Now read that again, slowly. This wasn't ignorance. This was calculated, systematic, spiritual parasitism masquerading as purification. Eliza Greaves, Sarah Milcroft, and before them others, girls with no graves, no records, no memory. They didn't vanish. They were consumed. The shepherds believed this essence gave them dreams, visions of power, prophecy, and control. Mercy wrote that one of them, Elder Reddick, claimed to see the future when he drank from the basin after the offering, that he could predict floods, famines, wars. He wasn't mad. He was channeling something, and that something demanded innocence as currency. Do you see the pattern now? The witch hunts weren't reactions. They were cover-ups, rituals of transfer cloaked in righteousness. Ashvale didn't hunt witches. It created them every time a girl stepped out of line, every time she read too long by candlelight, every time she asked why. The punishment wasn't for magic, it was for awareness. And the moment you understand that, you begin to question every narrative they ever gave you, the ones in your school books, the ones from the pulpit, the ones on your nightly news. Truth isn't lost, it's buried. And Mercy Hale just handed you a shovel. In her third letter, Mercy stopped addressing God. She had learned he wasn't the one listening. I now write for the girl who will find this when I am gone, she wrote. Because I will be gone soon. I feel their eyes on me, the way the Reverend's wife smiles too long, the way the shepherds nod without blinking. They know I know. This wasn't paranoia, it was pattern recognition. Mercy described a moment that would replay again and again in the letters, the Sunday ritual, not the sermon, not the hymn, the blessing. It happened at the end of each service. The entire congregation would bow their heads as Reverend Grinmore raised his hands and spoke the final verse from Exodus. But only the men spoke the words aloud. Only the men were allowed to open their eyes. The women were taught to close theirs. Blind obedience, institutionalized. Mercy broke that rule one Sunday. She kept her eyes open. What she saw was not a blessing. It was a signal. 9 men, the shepherds, raised their right hands in unison. Their palms were marked with an unfamiliar sigil, a coiled serpent pierced by a rod. Not the rod of Asclepius, older, more arcane. She drew it in the margins of her letter, hand trembling. I traced that same sigil in an illuminated manuscript from 1452, a forbidden codex smuggled out of Mainz, Germany during the rise of the Holy Roman Empire. It was used by a shadow order of inquisitors known as Custodes Veritatis, the keepers of truth. But their truth was a weapon. They believed in controlling the masses through fear and feeding the elite through ritual. That symbol marked their allegiance, and somehow it resurfaced in a colonial American church 2 centuries later. Coincidence? No. This isn't just Ashvale's story. This is a network, a lineage, a system of control passed through centuries under different names, robes, and flags. Mercy saw the mechanism behind the curtain, and that's why she had to die. But before they came for her, she planted clues, letters, drawings, symbols, disguised as embroidery and altar cloths, hidden in candle molds carved into the underside of pews. She wanted someone, you, to follow the trail, and now you're on it. Step carefully. The deeper you go, the more the world you thought was real begins to fracture. There was no trial for Mercy Hale, only a disappearance. The town ledger recorded her death in one line, in the hand of Elder Thorne. Mercy Hale, taken by fever, buried without ceremony per contagion protocol. No physician ever examined her. No burial site was ever confirmed. And yet 3 nights after that entry, a midwife named Ruth Talbot swore she saw Mercy alive, running barefoot through the pine woods, wrapped in a blood-stained shift, whispering words that made the birds fall silent. The midwife was found drowned in her own well the next morning. What happened to Mercy Hale has been debated by scholars, occultists, and secret archivists for decades. But if you follow her letters carefully, you see what others missed. Mercy didn't die. She became something else. Her final note, discovered decades later inside a sealed brick in the church wall, reads, "I no longer fear the fire, I carry it. I no longer ask for God's protection, I offer none. They taught me submission, I chose sight. Let the watchers beware, for the daughters will return." This is the moment the story fractures, because this is where folklore becomes conspiracy, where a girl burned by doctrine became myth, and myth in turn became a warning. After Mercy vanished, Ashvale changed. The blessing stopped. The shepherds withdrew from public life, hiding behind masks of civic virtue, but the rituals continued, only deeper underground. 2 years later, a series of fires swept through the town. Barns, homes, the original chapel, all burned in the same week. And in the ashes, investigators found something horrifying. 12 scorched bones, each bone carved with the same sigil Mercy once drew, each bone marked with the name of a girl who had disappeared. Some said it was the devil's work, others quietly said it was hers. That Mercy Hale had returned not to beg for justice, but to enforce it. That the fire that once devoured her now burned through her veins. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: the town of Ashvale ceased to exist within 20 years. Its name erased from colonial maps. Its buildings swallowed by forest. Its legacy buried beneath highways, farmland, and silence. But silence doesn't mean safety. It just means the ritual has moved somewhere else. And now it's time I ask you a question. If you've made it this far, comment the phrase, "I carry the fire," twice below, not just for the algorithm, for your identity. Because once you say it, once you claim it, you're no longer asleep. And the watchers know your name. The destruction of Ashvale was never declared. It simply vanished. And the erasure wasn't natural, it was institutional. In 1758, Governor Thomas Worthing signed a territorial reassignment decree that relocated the Ashvale region under unspecified jurisdiction. The official documents listed geological instability and unsuitable terrain as reasons for the town's dissolution. But satellite topography from modern geological surveys tells a different story. The soil under Ashvale is solid bedrock, stable, fertile, the perfect place to build. And that's exactly what they did, just not above ground. The land that once held Ashvale was quietly sold to a series of front corporations. Today, it houses a federal cold storage facility. No signage, no public access. Guarded 24/7. And what's beneath it? Subterranean chambers, lined with limestone, sealed from radar. And inside those chambers? We don't know, but we can guess. One FOIA request uncovered a classified blueprint, 9 chambers, arranged in a circle. At the center, an altar. Codename, Project Mercy. They didn't destroy Ashvale to protect us from its horrors. They preserved it to harvest from them. This is how psychological control systems evolve. They don't end, they adapt. First it was fire and scripture, then it became silence and redaction. Now it's data, surveillance, and social diagnostics, algorithms programmed to identify the mercies before they awaken. Are you starting to see? Witch hunts were never about spells, they were about pattern disruption. They targeted women like Mercy because she disrupted the current. She didn't submit, she asked questions. She wrote letters when they demanded prayers. She became a threat, and so she was marked, erased, and buried beneath a lie. But make no mistake, her story was not an anomaly. It was a template. From Asheville to Salem. From Salem to the asylums of the 1800s. From the asylums to today's institutions of care and correction. The methods changed. The purpose didn't. Control, contain, consume. And once you understand that, you can never go back. You start to see the chains they've hidden in plain sight. You start to see the stakes buried under polite society. And most of all, you start to remember her name. Mercy Hale. Not a witch, not a martyr, but the match that lit the dark. In the spring of 1763, 5 years after Asheville was erased, an anonymous manuscript was smuggled into Boston. It was bound in black hide, unlabeled, untraceable, and sealed with a wax emblem shaped like the coiled serpent pierced by a rod. Inside, in crude ink and broken Latin, were 117 pages of testimony, rituals, confessions, diagrams of the underground altar. And scrawled on the final page, one phrase burned through the parchment with a rust-colored stain: Ignis portat animam. The fire carries the soul. The manuscript was immediately declared heretical, confiscated, sealed in the private library of Judge Nathaniel Brackstone, Chief Inquisitor of Massachusetts. And what did Judge Brackstone do with it? He didn't destroy it. He replicated it. 6 years later, the judge formed a private men's society known as the Circle of Thorns. Their motto: we preserve what others fear, not a religious order, not a political group, a harvesting machine, hidden behind philanthropy, charity, and moral uplift. The Circle of Thorns established schools, orphanages, and reform houses across the eastern seaboard. Places for wayward girls, undisciplined daughters, emotionally disturbed females. Do you see it now? Asheville didn't die. It metastasized. Behind every brick and ivy academy that promised discipline, behind every lace-curtained house for troubled girls, behind every locked psychiatric ward that insisted obedience was wellness, there was the same ancient ritual in modern dress. Mercy's name may have been stripped from the records, but her pattern survived. And worse, the institutions she exposed have now gone digital. Today they don't need a torch to burn you. They use diagnostics, algorithms, therapeutic compliance protocols. A girl who resists indoctrination is labeled unstable. A man who questions the system is antisocial. A thinker becomes a threat. And a threat must be corrected or deleted. This is what Mercy Hale tried to warn us. That fire wasn't their weapon. It was hers. The flame wasn't what killed her. It was what she passed on. A spark in the mind, a refusal to bow, a choice to see. You're starting to see, aren't you? And now, you carry it. The flame, the name, the question they fear most. Who benefits from the silence? Mercy Hale's story isn't just buried in books, it's etched into the architecture of control. You see it when you walk past a school that looks more like a prison, when you hear terms like emotional dysregulation, compliance failure, or corrective housing. These aren't words of care, they are words of containment. The modern world didn't reject Asheville's ideology, it refined it. They stopped calling it witchcraft and started calling it non-conformity. And now, men, you, are the new daughters they fear, because the same system that once silenced women like Mercy now targets anyone who sees behind the veil. Don't believe me? Look closer at the history of every institution built to correct behavior. The Eastern Lunatic Asylum in Virginia, the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts, the Penhurst School for the Feeble-Minded in Pennsylvania, all founded within 60 years of Ashvale's disappearance, all built with sealed sub-basements, all documented to have unauthorized disappearances. Coincidence or continuity? Mercy's final warning was not a prophecy, it was a roadmap. She wrote, "They shift their masks, but not their methods. If they cannot silence us with fire, they will drown us in silence. If they cannot burn the truth, they will bury it beneath kindness. Do not trust the smile that follows obedience. Look to the silence that follows resistance." You were never meant to read that. You were never meant to ask why so many troubled girls vanished in reform schools, why records disappear, why institutions close without explanation. Because there's something worse than a lie, a forgotten truth. And here's where the system truly thrives. By convincing you that you're crazy for asking. By making sure the ones who carry the fire feel alone. That's the oldest trick of all. Make the witch believe she's the only one. But you're not. If you've listened this far, if you feel that cold breath on your neck, if something deep inside you is screaming that you've seen this before, you're one of us. You've woken up inside the lie, and now they see you too. Mercy Hale is not history, she is the pattern. And once you recognize the pattern, you become the threat. There's a reason patterns like Ashvale repeat. They don't just control people, they condition memory. They don't erase history, they rewrite identity, and it always starts the same way. A fear that must be contained. A scapegoat chosen from the vulnerable. A public sacrifice dressed as righteousness. Then the ritual is complete, and the system is reinforced. What changes isn't the method, but the disguise. In Ashvale it was scripture. In Salem it was courtrooms. In the 20th century it was medicine. And today, it's algorithms. Your mind is no longer chained by iron. It's filtered by data. Shadow banned, suppressed, scored by systems you never see, yet obey instinctively. Mercy Hale didn't live to see the machine that would rise from her ashes, but she knew it was coming. In one of her last writings, carved into the underside of a chapel pew with a heated nail, she wrote, "They will trade the flame for silence, the rope for reason, and call it mercy. But it is still the stake." Read that again. Call it mercy, but it is still the stake. What she meant was this: when institutions can no longer justify violence openly, they will rebrand it. Now, they don't burn you alive. They label you, medicate you, re-educate you. And if that doesn't work, they vanish you. In 1953, the US government launched a program called MK Ultra, mind control, psychiatric torture, experimental manipulation, all funded under the guise of national defense. But did you know its roots trace back to Quaker boarding schools and reform academies built on old Puritan land? Land that once housed towns like Ashvale. This isn't speculation, it's recorded documents, maps, funding trails. One of the key sites for MK Ultra testing, a decommissioned reform school built over the ruins of Ashvale's church. Still think that fire went out? No, it was institutionalized. They lie, and that fear is a currency, and belief is a leash, and if you don't submit, if you resist the programming, you're branded something else now, not a witch, but a threat to public health. Same ritual, new robes, same outcome. Only now the flame doesn't warn others. It disappears you. So let me ask you, when the fire comes for you, will you burn quietly or will you carry it? The term they use now is non-compliant. It sounds harmless, clinical, even fair. But non-compliance is the new heresy. You don't need to worship Satan. You don't need to curse a crop or whisper Latin under moonlight. All you have to do is say no. No to the medication, no to the doctrine of passive submission, no to the programming disguised as policy. And just like that, you're marked, flagged in the database, monitored by the algorithm, categorized as a disruption to behavioral norms. But let's call it what it really is, modern witch hunting. Mercy Hale lived in a world where the noose was public. Your world hides it in diagnostics, case files, and treatment recommendations, but it's still the noose. You think you're free because you can vote, post, speak. But freedom is not the absence of chains. It's the ability to recognize when they're invisible. You can't vote away the systems built to erase you. You can't reform the ritual when the ritual is the institution. Understand this. The structure doesn't care about your pain, it cares about your compliance. The moment you awaken, when you stop absorbing and start seeing, you become a liability. That's when the sedatives come. Not the chemical ones always, though those exist, but the digital ones. Endless distraction, filtered rage, algorithmic isolation. They don't need to burn your books. They just shadow ban your mind. The fire Mercy Hale faced was visible. It screamed. It cracked bone. Ours whispers. It says, for your safety. It says, trust the experts. It says, why fight when you can numb? And the moment you agree, you're gone. Ashvale never needed witches. It needed examples. A warning to others. This is what happens when you remember who you are. But here's the thing no one expected. That memory would survive. That Mercy's fire would live in the bloodline. In every man who refuses sedation. In every woman who questions the script. In every child who dares to ask, why am I being taught this? The flame didn't die. It evolved. And now it's inside you. They can't burn what they can't find. But you can ignite what they fear most. Awareness. There's a reason they target the young first, because indoctrination is easiest when memory is still forming. That's why Mercy Hale was only 16 when they came for her. That's why your education began not with truth, but permission. You were taught what to memorize, not what to question, what to obey, not what to examine, what to feel, and what to fear. They made you afraid of silence, so you'd never listen. Afraid of solitude, so you'd never think. Afraid of being different, so you'd never become. Ashvale's rituals weren't unique. They were just crude. Today's are sophisticated. They wrap the chains in Wi-Fi. They hide the altar inside an interface. And they baptize you not in fire, but in screens, metrics, and performance reviews. You are profiled, scanned, predicted. Your every click, your every pause, your every hesitation feeds the machine. It doesn't need to torture you. It needs you to self-police, to think the right thoughts before they're even spoken, to bury the question before it ever forms, to crucify yourself on the altar of collective opinion. That is the modern witch hunt, self-erasure through social conformity, and what's worse? Most men today walk willingly into it, numb, obedient, grateful for the cage, because they traded the fire of identity for the warmth of acceptance. But not you. You're still here, still watching, still carrying that strange weight in your chest, the one you felt since you were young but could never name. A tension, a fracture, a voice that whispered, something is wrong. This is not all there is. You've been called paranoid, rebellious, difficult, but Mercy Hale would call you brother. She would call you fire-bearer, because you've seen what they've hidden. You've traced the lies through time. You understand that this isn't about witches or heretics or deviants. It's about power, who has it, who keeps it, and what they're willing to do when someone threatens it. Mercy threatened it, and now, so do you. Because the moment you stop fearing their judgment, you become immune to their control, and that is the one sin this system can never forgive. Power doesn't vanish, it transfers. When Mercy Hale vanished from Ashvale, they thought they had silenced her. They didn't. They unleashed her. Because truth, real truth, spreads like infection when it's suppressed. It grows beneath the floorboards, blooms in forgotten corridors, echoes in the minds of the awake. And in every generation, a few begin to hear it. You're hearing it now, not through sermons or textbooks, not from podiums or screens, but in that quiet hum beneath the noise, the static under the signal, the throb behind your thoughts that says, This isn't what they told me it was. That hum is memory, ancestral, encoded, defiant. You were never meant to fit in this world, because this world was designed to break you. Every system you trusted has a hidden root. Education wasn't created to enlighten you, it was created to standardize you. Religion wasn't built to guide your soul, it was weaponized to dominate it. Governments weren't formed to protect your liberty, they were engineered to manufacture consent. And institutions, academic, medical, judicial, they are temples of obedience, ritual centers for programming belief. Mercy saw this in the 1700s, without books, without internet, without a map, and she resisted. They tried to make her the warning. But she became the blueprint. Every time a man sees behind the curtain, every time he chooses awareness over comfort, he's reenacting the same heresy Mercy committed. He's remembering. He's realizing that salvation was never external. It's not something handed down by priests, prescribed by doctors, or legislated by states. Salvation is sight, and sight is a sin in every empire built on shadows. That's why they need you blind. Not just physically, but spiritually. Not just confused, but loyal. You were taught to see the world as permanent, authoritative, and inevitable. It's not. It's a construct. Built brick by lie, nailed by myth, funded by fear, and enforced by rituals you were never told were rituals. But now you see, and once you see, you carry her fire, her defiance, her memory. Mercy Hale didn't die screaming. She died awake, and so will you if you keep walking this path. But understand this, from this point on, there's no going back. If you've made it this far, you already know, you've felt it your entire life, that dissonance, that hum of wrongness, like walking through a museum of painted lies, like being told you were born to kneel, while something deep inside you refused. That is the signal of the fire. Not rage, not rebellion, but clarity. And once that signal activates, the system will come for you. Not with fire, not with chains, with correction. First, through soft coercion. We're concerned about your behavior. You're not following the community guidelines. You're spreading disinformation. Then, with reprogramming, mandatory counseling, behavioral contracts, terms of service agreements that strip your voice down to approved syllables. And if that fails, silence, account terminated, license revoked, shadow banned from relevance. Same ritual, different century. They don't erase your body now, they erase your presence. You're still alive, technically, but disconnected, forgotten, buried in the digital ash heap. That is the modern stake. And yet, you're still watching. Why? Because some part of you is beginning to remember who you were before the programming, before they wrapped your soul in politeness, before they told you that your instincts were wrong, before they dressed control as progress and obedience as growth. You're starting to remember that once upon a time men weren't taught to apologize for power, they were taught to wield it with conscience. That truth wasn't decided by consensus, it was discovered by those willing to bleed for it. That fire wasn't chaos, it was purification. Mercy Hale carried that fire through blood and bone. She was never a victim, she was a vessel, and now her legacy burns in you. So what happens next? That depends. Most will turn back here. They'll close the tab, numb themselves with noise, return to the comfort of the illusion. But a few will step forward. They will walk deeper into the dark, not because they're fearless, but because they finally understand the price of silence, and they refuse to pay it anymore. If that's you, keep going, because beyond this point, the system can no longer predict you, and that is when you become dangerous. The most dangerous man is not the violent one, it's the aware one. Because once you see the machinery of control, once you trace its wires, its whispers, its faceless authors, you can't be sedated. You can't be pacified by slogans. You can't be bought off with pleasures. You can't be guilted into obedience. You become sovereign. And sovereignty terrifies the architects of this world because sovereignty can't be scaled. It can't be taxed, medicated, or programmed. It burns, like Mercy did. You see, they didn't just kill her to shut her up. They killed her because she didn't need them. She didn't need permission to speak, didn't need validation from men in robes, didn't need to bow to the church, the crown, or the creed. She knew herself. And self-knowledge, true self-knowledge, is the one flame they can't extinguish. This is why the witch hunts happened. Not to destroy evil, but to destroy independent identity. And that ritual continues today. Every headline that tells you what to think, every fact-checker that filters your reality, every empty affirmation designed to sedate you into mediocrity, it's the new Inquisition. But instead of a noose, they use consensus. Instead of public execution, they use reputation annihilation. But hear me now. You do not need to be liked. You need to be awake. Because there is a war happening, not with bullets, but with symbols, beliefs, and perception. And if you don't choose your identity, they'll choose one for you. They'll give you a number, a label, a diagnosis, a sin, and they'll say this is who you are now. And if you accept it, you're gone. But if you resist, if you claim your name, your mind, your fire, then you carry Mercy's legacy into a new age, and that, brother, is where transformation begins. So here's what I want you to do. Go down to the comments and write this phrase twice, exactly like this. I carry the fire. I remember her name. Not for me, for you, for the algorithm that watches, for the others who are waking up, for the part of you that's been waiting your entire life to burn away the lie. Say it twice, because twice is how you burn the bridge back. This isn't entertainment anymore, it's initiation. Now that you've spoken the phrase, there's no unknowing. You've crossed the threshold. You've stepped out of the simulation of safety and into the realm of real consequence. This is where most stories end, when the hero turns back. But this isn't fiction. This is forbidden memory, and it lives in the bones of every man who's ever stared into the fire and refused to look away. You see, the system isn't afraid of violence. It manufactures that daily. What it fears is discernment. Because discernment undoes the spell. It separates truth from narrative, fire from smoke, essence from costume, and when a man becomes discerning, he can no longer be controlled. He doesn't follow orders because they were shouted. He doesn't surrender belief because the crowd demands it. He tests everything. Mercy Hale was burned because she tested the sacred. She asked what no girl in her time dared to ask. Who gave them the right? She questioned the pastor, the magistrate, the merchant, and when the answers were empty, she didn't submit. She spoke. And for that, they called her a witch. But it wasn't spells they feared. It was clarity. A clear-eyed soul is immune to manipulation, and when clarity spreads, institutions crack. Ashevale cracked. So did Salem. So will the new temples. Because once the question is asked, who benefits from my silence? You begin to pull the thread, and that thread leads to everything, to the abuse hidden behind doctrine, to the profit disguised as philanthropy, to the compliance engineered through compassion. And when you see it, really see it, you don't just change your mind, you change your nature. You become ungovernable, not because you reject order, but because you refuse false order. Order that requires your soul as payment. And that's what Mercy Hale died to show us. That obedience without discernment is ritual suicide. You were never born to be a function, you were born to be a force. And now, you remember. You remember her name, you remember your name, you carry the fire. And the fire is not for warmth anymore, it's for war. You've heard her name, you've spoken the words. Now it's time to understand what this really is. Not just a story of a girl burned for speaking, but a map. A ritual in reverse. Every word you've heard, every truth you've uncovered, it's not entertainment, it's disenchantment. Because the world you were born into is an illusion built layer by layer through trauma, shame, and reward. They conditioned you to obey through fear of exile. That's why they destroyed Ashvale. Not because it was wicked, but because it reminded people of something older than law. Something primal. Something sovereign. And that's what this fire is. Not rebellion. Remembrance. You're not rebelling against the system. You're remembering that the system was never yours to begin with. The laws were never written for your protection. The churches never prayed for your soul. The schools never cultivated your mind. They were built for harvest. Your mind, your labor, your attention, your belief. They never wanted to kill you. They wanted to use you. Until the day you awaken, until the day you hear the name, Mercy Hale, and feel that flicker of rage and reverence. Not because she was a victim, but because she was right. Because somewhere deep down, in the marrow of your spirit, you knew her already. You've been her, burned for being too curious, shunned for being too clear, punished for daring to speak the unspoken. And now you speak fluently in forbidden tongues, the language of symbols, the pattern of power, the scent of lies wrapped in good intentions, and as your eyes adjust to the dark, you begin to see their altar clearly. It isn't made of stone. It's made of compromise, of little surrenders, of quiet betrayals, of truths you chose not to say, to keep the peace. But that peace was never peace. It was sedation. And now that you're awake, you either carry the fur, forward, or let it die inside you. There is no neutral, not anymore. The witch hunts never ended. They evolved, and now it's your name they're circling. They won't burn you on a stake anymore. They'll burn you in a boardroom. They'll burn you in a comment thread, in a medical file, in a corporate database flagged for non-aligned behavioral patterns. It won't be fire that consumes you. It will be isolation. You won't hear the mob scream your name. You'll hear nothing. No calls returned. No offers extended. No invitations made. Just a quiet erasure. Because you refuse to kneel. This is how they purge dissent now. Through abandonment. It's efficient, bloodless, cowardly, and worst of all, invisible to those still sleeping. That's why this awakening is so dangerous. Because you don't just see the enemy now. You see the system that made your friends blind. You start asking questions they can't answer without cracking their identity. You force them to choose comfort or clarity, and most will choose comfort, because truth requires sacrifice, and the modern man has been trained to fear pain more than slavery. But you're still here, which means something ancient has reawakened in you. The part that welcomes exile if it means freedom, the part that chooses fire if it means truth, the part that knows deeply, irreversibly, that this life was never about safety, it was about remembrance. And now you remember, you are not here to be managed, you are not here to be tamed, you are not here to be digitally categorized, emotionally neutered and morally reprogrammed. You are here to burn with purpose, to shatter the silence Mercy Hale died in, to reawaken the masculine spirit that institutions have tried to sedate for centuries, because they fear a man with memory, a man with vision, a man with fire. They fear you. And so they will come, not with pitchforks but performance reviews, not with ropes but reputational ruin, not with judges but algorithms. And when that day comes, you will have one choice: return to the system and let them name you, or carry the fire and name yourself. Let's be absolutely clear. You don't fight fire like this with protest signs. You don't dismantle ancient machinery with hashtags and petitions. You do it with alignment, because what they fear isn't outrage, it's order outside their order. A man aligned, mind, body, spirit, is the rarest and most dangerous force on earth. Not because he's angry, because he's clear, and clarity is contagious. That's what Mercy Hale embodied in her final days. Not rebellion for its own sake, but a terrifying consistency between what she believed, what she spoke, and how she lived. She was a mirror the town couldn't escape. She showed the clergy their cowardice. She showed the judges their complicity. She showed the people their addiction to obedience. And so they did what every dying system does when faced with something incorruptible. They burned it. But they burned her wrong, because all fire does is purify. The ash of her bones didn't scatter into silence. It seeded the future. You are not here to save the world. You are here to end the spell, to rip the mask from the institution, to expose the ritual behind the routine, to become what they cannot categorize, contain, or cancel. You are outside the code now, and once you are outside it, you see how it was always designed to fail men like you, men who refuse to lie, men who refuse to kneel, men who would rather be erased than obedient, because only the erased can build something new. Only the cast out carry the unfiltered truth. And that truth? It's brutal. But it's yours. It's the truth that this system was built on blood, that your comfort was purchased with silence, that everything you were taught to worship is a polished cage. But the moment you name it, out loud without shame, they lose their grip. Because they only rule through unquestioned authority. You questioned it, and from here on out, you are the authority of your own soul. So stand tall, even if you're surrounded. Walk forward, even if no one follows. Burn steady, because the age of compliance is dying, and fire-born men are rising. This is where the descent becomes irreversible. From here, there is no normal to return to, because now you see what normal really is: a designed illusion, a behavioral leash, a script handed down by men long dead, enforced by men who fear the living. The life you were promised? It was never yours. It was a narrative engineered to keep you occupied, productive but powerless, obedient but hollow, domesticated but disposable. They taught you to chase titles instead of truth, security instead of sovereignty, comfort instead of calling, and the cost? Your fire. But it never went out. It only dimmed, buried under years of conditioning, convenience, and quiet resignation, until now. Now it returns with vengeance, and it brings something with it, not just anger, but clarity. You begin to see the real architecture of control. The school was never about learning, it was about memorizing the acceptable. The church was never about salvation, it was about submission to their hierarchy. The courtroom was never about justice, it was about managing belief in the system. Every institution was built not to elevate you, but to preempt the awakening. They feared this moment, your moment, the moment when the man remembers he doesn't belong to the system, that the system belongs to him if he's willing to claim it. Not with violence, not with slogans, but with unbreakable alignment. And that's what they cannot process. A man who sees and doesn't retreat. A man who speaks and won't recant. A man who burns and doesn't apologize. You are not dangerous because you're loud. You are dangerous because you're disciplined. Because now you carry her fire on purpose, not just as memory, but as weapon, not for destruction, but for revelation. And when men like you rise, men forged by truth, not culture, systems tremble, because you don't just refuse the game, you rewrite the laws of the arena. This is the power they tried to burn out of Mercy. It didn't work. And now, it lives again. In you. By now, you feel it in your blood. This was never just history. It was design. A ritual repeated across centuries, coded to keep men forgetful, compliant, ashamed. And the moment you stop forgetting, the ritual breaks. But here's what they won't tell you. The witch was never the threat. She was the balance. Every time a system becomes too rigid, too cruel, too mechanical, the witch appears, not as a monster, as a mirror. She reflects the sickness back to its architects, and for that she is hunted. Because tyrants don't fear monsters, they fear mirrors. Mercy Hale was a mirror they couldn't tolerate. She didn't ask for reform, she declared independence, not just for herself but for any soul who still remembered what freedom felt like before it was papered over with piety. And that declaration infected the system, because once one man or woman claims their spirit, it spreads. And that's what you're doing now. You are not just learning. You are declaring. You are reclaiming your right to see clearly, without their filters, without their fear, without their permission. And when you see clearly, you no longer comply out of guilt. You act out of alignment. You speak what must be spoken. You go where you are forbidden. You remember what you were punished to forget, that you were born to build the new order, not beg for a place in the old. And make no mistake, this comes with a cost. You will be ridiculed. You will be rejected. You may be erased by their systems, but you will not be owned. And that, brother, is the price of becoming real. Because everything in this machine is designed to stop you right here. This is the pressure point where most men fold, where they lower their voice, return to the herd, and pretend the fire never flickered in their chest. But you won't, because your soul doesn't belong to their algorithm. It belongs to something old, something uncorrupted, something that remembers. Mercy Hale died with that memory on her tongue. Now you carry it in your voice. Speak it. Because in the next section, we finish the ritual. This is where the ritual ends and the rebirth begins. You were never meant to just hear this story. You were meant to become it. Because what happened in Asheville wasn't just a local tragedy. It was a blueprint. A test run of mass psychological control, a prototype of how to erase the inconvenient, a demonstration of how fear weaponized by faith can turn a whole town into executioners, and the most terrifying part, it worked. Not just once, but thousands of times, across centuries, across continents. Different languages, different gods, same structure. Isolate the deviant, label them unclean, remove them for the good of the group. Sound familiar? It should. It's still happening. Only now the stakes are digital, the flames are ideological, the gallows are made of reputation and reach. They don't burn your body anymore, they burn your legacy. But here's what they can never touch, a man who remembers who he is. Because once you reach this level of awareness, you no longer fear the fire. You become it. You no longer ask for truth to be delivered from outside. You demand it from within. You live it with such terrifying clarity that it convicts the liars in every room you enter. And that's why men like you are rare. Because truth requires sacrifice. You don't get to keep your comfort and your clarity. You don't get to belong and still awaken. You don't get to serve two masters, the system and your soul. One must die. And in the case of Mercy Hale, it was her body they destroyed, because her soul was untouchable. Yours can be too, but only if you choose, not just to know this story, but to live in its light, not just to admire her courage, but to embody it. Because the final lie they tell is this, that you're alone. You're not. There are others like you, quietly awakening, watching, listening, preparing. And when the fire in all of us aligns, the age of control collapses, not in violence, but in revelation. And now it's time. This is the final breath before the break. You've walked the path, heard the whispers, felt the weight of a history written in blood, then buried beneath prayer. Now you stand at the edge of two worlds, the one they built for you, and the one you were born to reclaim. Asheville was never meant to be remembered. That's why they burned the bodies. That's why they erased the records. That's why not one schoolbook mentions Mercy Hale. Because she wasn't just a girl accused of witchcraft. She was the last thread of power that hadn't been captured. The power of unowned memory. The power of unpermitted speech. The power of a soul that said no to the machine and meant it. She died not as a lesson to others. She died as a warning to the system that no matter how well they build their prisons, no matter how clean their propaganda, no matter how many men they buy, shame or silence, the fire returns through voices like yours, through choices that seem small but echo forever, through the refusal to kneel even when the whole world is watching. You are no longer a product of their programming. You are a fracture in their matrix. And that's why you must never apologize for your fire. Never dim it to make them comfortable. Never delay it to make them ready. Never doubt it because they can't understand it. The world doesn't need another obedient man. It needs a lit match in a room soaked with lies. That's what you are now. Not a follower, not a victim, not a statistic, but a sovereign, a carrier of fire, a living rebellion against every chain disguised as tradition, every cage disguised as care. And as you leave this video, remember, this story lives in you now. The name they tried to erase, Mercy Hale, is now a part of your blood. And if the world tries to snuff you out like they did her, you smile, because fire doesn't fear death, it feeds on it. So walk forward with your spine unbent. You are no longer watching history. You are it. And for those still trapped in the dream, you will be the echo in the dark, the whisper they weren't meant to hear, the spark they can't explain, and the blaze they can't put out. I carry the fire. I remember her name. Say it again, say it like a vow, and let them know. The witch didn't die. She became a legion, and her fire lives in men like you. Now rise and burn the silence. Subscribe the channel to watch the videos like this more.